Okay, well, here you see a typical modern day meandering river, and you can see why it's called a meandering river because it meanders around. This is the active river. Excuse me. This is the active. Whoop, one of my morning troubles here. It's going to take a minute to figure out what's happening here. Okay, so the active river, this is the river channel, and you can see why it's called meandering. And the main parts of the meandering river are the channel itself, like you see in this diagram here. And the sand, you do get some sand in the channel, but the big accumulations of sand are on what we call the point bar side, or the inside bend of the channel. So here, if you were to walk on this body here, it would be sandy, and that would be your main reservoir interval. So going back to this diagram here, where you get the vegetation here and there, if we were to dig out the vegetation, we would find good sand. Now, here you see a channel, one side of the channel and the other side of a channel. Most of the time, the channels are not very active. Water flows, but not a whole lot of sediment gets transported down the channel during most of the time. It's really during only when you have a flood stage here, and you can see this town has been flooded, where you had your main channel with a lot of water flowing down and then spilling out over the bank into what we call the floodplain. So this process goes on, and channels migrate with time. As I kind of briefly mentioned yesterday, when this channel becomes abandoned, these channels are not permanent. They become abandoned at some point, and for example, you may have a flood that the flood waters are fast enough that it carves out the channel margin and then moves over here. So then you have your active channel here, but all of this then becomes a lake, low energy, no more river flow, and it becomes a lake. And over time, in that lake environment, you'll get mud accumulating. And so you end up over time, over periods of geological time, you end up with a vertical permeability barrier, which we call a mud plug. And I'll show you some better pictures of that in a while. So these processes go on. If we look down here at number D, we see here in this particular case, here's the modern river shown in blue. It's active. Down like that, you've got one of these oxbow lakes where the river got cut off, and the green are these mud plugs. There and there, and so on, due to channel migration. So it becomes very difficult to decide where to drill your well, because your well or your sand bodies are going to be isolated from each other by these mud plugs. Now let me show you an example of that. Um, Here's a three-dimensional diagram illustrating that. And this picture here, this picture is pretty much the same one as I showed here, but different colors. So you see the main river is in dark blue here. It's coming down like this. There's a very nice meander, what we call a meander loop. And so that's the modern river. And then all of these other, what's shown in orange and blue and green, those are sediments that were deposited, but are now more or less, that area is now more or less inactive. You don't have any active sedimentation except near the modern channel. So if you look at this in 3 dimensions, looking at it in 3 dimensions, you get something like this, where you'll have your sand bodies in yellow, and where you had a channel that became inactive and filled with mud, you'll get these mud-filled channels, or mud plugs as I call them, and they'll be like a vertical wall of mud that can isolate the sand over here from the sand over there. So you have to decide, or one of the things is someone who's doing reservoir characterization has to figure out what the sizes and orientations of these point bar sands are, and then how widely or how closely spaced you have to put your wells if you're drilling vertical wells. Now, so let's drill a vertical well here. So we now have a vertical well that we've drilled, shown in black here. And what that well is going to do is drain the hydrocarbons out of this sand body, but it's not going to be able to cross the fluids, can't get across the mud plug, and so it's an isolated sandy compartment. Well, there's another thing you can do, is you can drill a slant or a horizontal well so that you break through, that's shown in blue here, so that, let's see, let me get all these colors off here. Okay, so that you can drill a slant or a horizontal well that breaks through these mud plugs, and now you would have better connectivity in that one well. You would get the hydrocarbons from this sand as well as from that sand on the other side of the mud plug. Now that becomes tricky in this type of a system because, again, it's difficult to know exactly where your break-off point is going to be, where you go horizontal, or what orientation to do your slant well on, and things like that. So you really need to know something about the geology. Now, geophysics in this case is a very powerful tool for being able to look at these channels, and it helps you decide where you want to put your well. And I'll show you that in a couple of slides. So here's an example where drilled one sidetrack well here, and another one over here that penetrated this sand body, but then crossed another mud plug here and penetrated this sand body as well. So that's an ideal case, something you would want to do, but it's very difficult unless you have very good seismic to see these channel orientations. It's difficult to decide where to put your wells. All right, well, here's a close-up view of a meandering channel. And as the river flows, this river is flowing in this direction. Okay, the direction of my arrow there. And what you can see on the outside bend of that river channel, you can see this washboard-like appearance, and those are ripples in sand, and those ripples migrate in the downstream direction. And but they only occur in the outside bend and not on the inside bend of your meander. So here's the inside bend there. Here's the outside bend. And what happens is that rivers, when you have a bend like this, they'll always flow faster on the outside bend. In other words, the molecules of water in the river are always trying to catch up on the outside bend to the molecules on the inside bend. So they travel faster, and what that promotes then is erosion along this bank here. And you can see it's a vertical, just a very nice vertical, what we call a cut bank side, because you've had erosion of the river, by the river, of the sediment on the other side. And what happens when you erode this sediment here, it'll come around the bend and be deposited on this inside bend of the channel, because that's where your flow velocities of your river are much less. So you get a velocity gradient of high velocities on the outside bend and lower velocities on the inside bend. So you have erosion on what we call the cut bank side, and then deposition on what we call the point bar side. That in that way, over over a certain geological time period, essentially your river channel is going to be migrating in this direction. Why is that? Because you're cutting away at the banks of the river. So you cut away and you get a new bank and a new bank and a new bank and so on. And your point bar side tends to migrate along. It follows along the cut bank side because you're having erosion here and deposition over there of the material that's eroded here on this side. So here's looking out at an airplane window, and you see a meandering river here, and here's that meander bend. So this is going to be the cut bank side. So with time, your river is going to migrate in this direction, and your point bar is going to form over here. And again, you do get sand in the channel, but really your big accumulation of sand where you want to drill your well is going to be into this point bar. Okay? So let me show in the next picture just how you get this migration of the river with geological time, as a function of geological time. So here we have a river. We'll look at this cross section through there. And we're going to look at the channel, look down at the channel at, we'll say, time 1. So at time 1, this dashed line is going to be the orientation of your channel. So you've got just a little bit of a bend in the channel at time 1, so you'll get a little sand deposited out in here as a point bar. But what happens is, and that would be this material here, this point bar material. So here's the point bar side, and here's the cut bank side over here. But with time, you get erosion of the cut bank side and deposition on the point bar, so the whole system moves from right to left. So at time 2, which is shown here, okay, I'll use another color for time 2. Use a blue. So at time 2, this now becomes your river. The meander bend is becoming more curvature to the meander bend. And so now you've deposited sand as a point bar right there. And that sand is going to be this sand right there. And so you have the green sand here, which is this one, and then you have a younger blue one, point bar that's deposited, and you have cut bank side is now moved from right to left. So now we're moving our channel, and then at time 3 here, I'll use another color for that. This one. At time 3, with that continued erosion and deposition, we now have a more curvature to our river channel. So we get deposition here of point bar on the inside bend, and that's what this is going to be here. So what we have then is this is the blue one here, and then this will be the green one over here. So the end result of this is we have progressive meander from right to left of our river, leaving behind a nice accumulation of point bar sands. And so that's where most of your sand is deposited, and that's where you would want to try to drill your well. Now at some point in time, this meander bend is going to become so wide that the channel is going to be cut off. And so your river may be flowing, let me get another color here. Well, let me see, okay, I'll erase all those. So as your river migrates from right to left, the curvature continues to build up so that at some point you're going to get what we call channel abandonment, and maybe during a flood stage you get a channel, a little red color here. You get your, at some point you get a channel here, and if you have a flood event coming around the bend, you can actually break through the margin of the channel and connect up with the channel over there. And then you start the process again. Well, except that what it leaves behind is this channel here, which becomes one of those oxbow lakes that fills with mud. So when we look out the airplane window here, when we're looking out the airplane window, what we can see is today's active channel. Hands aren't very steady in the morning. So you see an active channel, and your good sand is going to be right here. It's covered with vegetation now. Good sand body here, good sand body there, good sand body here, and separated in this case by the active channel. And when that channel becomes abandoned, you then create one of these lake environments, which we call the oxbow lake, and you can see a couple of these here. For example, here's an oxbow lake right there. An oxbow lake right there. Because at one time the channel was like that. And then you had a cutoff, and the new channel formed something like that. So you've left behind this old channel that fills with mud, and you get that oxbow lake, which is a kind of an abandoned channel fill. And that's what forms these mud plugs that are so important to compartmentalizing your reservoir. Here's another one you can see right through here. Another oxbow lake, and so on.
Where would the mud plug be on that picture?
Where would the mud plug be? It would be, well, this would be a mud plug here. There'd be one here. There'd be one down here. And now this is the active channel, so you're not going to have that in the active channel. But when, at some point, if you have a big flood that comes across and breaks through the banks and then goes across and connects up with the river here, you'll create another mud plug that is going to separate this sand body here from any sand that you might have over there. Okay?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Even if we make a well on the abandoned channel, we can find some sands that we can have some hydrocarbons, for example, because it depends on how many channels they have been deposited before it has been abandoned.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is where you would find your hydrocarbons, in the point bar, mainly. That's where you get your best sand. And so if there's hydrocarbons in the system, that's where they're going to accumulate. And especially if you have a mud plug. Let me go back a couple of slides here. If you have a mud plug, say right there, from an abandoned channel, okay, like that, you may have hydrocarbons in this sand body, and you drill a well, and you can get the hydrocarbons out of that sand body, but because of this mud plug, which is a vertical wall of mud essentially, it's going to isolate that sand body. So you have to drill another well on the other side of the mud plug to get the hydrocarbons. Does that answer your
Yes.
question? Okay. So,
You have to make two wells.
well, you have to make 2 wells, or if you think you know the orientation and size of the point bars, you can do one horizontal well that cuts across the mud plug, like this blue one here. You drill this well here, the blue one, and you'll get the hydrocarbons out of this point bar, and then you keep drilling and you go horizontal and you'll get the hydrocarbons out of that point bar. But that's tricky to do because these, unless you know the sizes and the orientations of the point bars. Yeah, so it's hard to do that way. The only other option is to drill two wells or one well and a sidetrack well. So those mud plugs are very important, and they're the agents of compartmentalization. That's what causes the compartmentalization in these point bar type deposit, meandering river deposits. Another way to look at that maybe is looking at this picture down here, which shows a vertical well. This black dot is a vertical well that will get the hydrocarbons out of this sand body. But that's all, because you've got that mud plug separating. So if you want to get more hydrocarbons, you have to drill another well, say one here, so you could drain the hydrocarbons out of that point bar, or you might drill another well right here, things like that. Well, here's a picture looking at a cross-sectional view of a channel and point bar system. The channel fill is down here. This would be your lenticular channel fill, and where in this case you do have some sand in the channel, but then you've got these downlapping features that are downlapping like that, and what those are, that's the point bar showing the way the point bar is migrating from right to left. Okay, you get all these little downlapping beds indicating transport your point bar from right to left, and it overtops the channel fill. And here's a cartoon up here to illustrate that. And down here is the cartoon illustrates the same thing. We call these features, I'm going to try to draw this, if I can do it. We call these features laterally migrating point bar, okay, with your transport direction from right to left. So the direction of downlap of your meandering of your point bar shows the direction of migration of the channel and the point bar. So this is just the laterally migrating point bar that you see there, and migrating from right to left. Now, if you were to, so this is a nice side view, and you can see these on seismic. I'll show you a couple of examples how you can see these, we call them lateral accretion beds. See if I can write that out here. We call these lateral accretion beds. These downlapping pattern here. Let back to this now. What are we gonna do? Okay, so these beds here are lateral accretion. We call them lateral accretion beds or packages of beds because they're laterally accreting. They're migrating in the lateral direction, the horizontal direction. Now, if you were, and again, I'll show you some examples on seismic that you can see these lateral accretion packages, which indicate you've got a good sand when you see these in seismic. Now, if you were looking straight down, say on a surface, a seismic surface, or the ground surface, what these lateral accretion beds would look like in that view would be something like what you see down here. These lateral accretion packages, they have a curvature to them that follows the curvature of the channel, and you've got migration now from the upper left towards the lower right for this point bar, and then for this point bar you have lateral accretion from the lower right up towards the upper left. And then when this becomes an abandoned channel and fills with mud, then you've actually got two reservoirs here, okay, separated by one of those mud plugs. And again, you can see these lateral accretion features on seismic. Well, here's looking out that airplane window again, up here. And here's a meander bend in your river. And you can see a nice sandy point bar developing on that inside bend. And if we were to dig through that, we would see something like this. We would see these lateral accretion packages downlapping in the direction of migration. So here's the lateral accretion packages. And so in this case, you're migrating from right to left. Now, sometimes you can have little shale breaks shown by the dark material or the dark color here are little shale breaks that you can sometimes have, which are strong enough to actually prevent fluids from crossing them. And in which case, if that's the case, you really want to do a horizontal well. You want to go across all those little shale barriers there. So here's another one, a picture of another one down here, where you've got a channel here, looking at this cross section. You've got your lateral accretion beds downlapping there, and then you have another channel here, and if we kept going, we'd get more lateral accretion beds on this side of that channel. So here you have a very nice picture here of one of these oxbow lakes where it used to be an active river channel, but the channel broke through somewhere else and abandoned. The channel became abandoned and then filled with a mud flood right in this area here. So you have your point bar or your channel right there, your abandoned channel, and your point bar is going to be right on that inside bend. I'll show you a few pictures of these, and then I'll show you some seismic. This is from a publication of a few years ago, and it shows a very nice example, I think, where some geologists went out and they, this is a meandering river system here that you see an outcrop. They measured a stratigraphic section right here, and that's section number 3. They measured another one here, that's section number 2, and then number 2 connects up over here. And then, so they measured another section, which they called section 1. And these are the distances apart. And what you see down here is a sandy channel fill. Here's the top surface of that sandy channel fill. And on the picture, that would be right here. This would be the sandy channel fill. There it is. There, all the symbols here refer to various features that you see in point bar deposits. Number 3, this is the point bar deposit. And you can see the lateral accretion beds here. See them dipping down. Okay. And they're pointing in the direction of the channel. Here's the channel again. So you've got your channel and your lateral accretion beds downlapping. And then here, above this red line, that's your clay plug. So see, these can be very thick, these clay plugs. This one's this thick, and certainly thick enough to prevent any fluids from migrating across these clay plugs. So very important, that feature. Okay, well, associated with the point bars are another feature which we call a crevasse play. And what it is when during a flood state usually, when your flow velocities in your river are very high enough that actually you break through the channel, your river breaks through the channel, the outside bend, and spills out all the sand where it's deposited out on the floodplain. Where it's deposited out on the floodplain here as a crevasse play type deposit. And they can make very good reservoirs too. And they're easy to see on seismic. If you're looking at horizon slices on seismic, it's pretty easy to see these features. Here's one here, for example, a modern day one. Here's your major river here. And right in this area here, you had, during a flood, the river broke through the channel margin and spilled the sand body out onto the sides here. So this can be a good reservoir if you've got enough sand in it. Now, these are particularly nice because they only occur in one location in a meandering river system, and that is on the outside bends of the channel. You have an outside bend there, so you've got one of these crevasse plays. You've got another outside bend right here. Here's the outside bend, and you've got another crevasse play. Well, why is that? Well, the reason is, if we go over to this diagram, the reason is, like I said before, if you're during a flood stage, you'll get very high flow velocities on the outside bends cut bank side of the river. And so with these very high velocities, when the river comes around the bend here, it's high velocity, so it's relatively easy for the river to break through the channel margin and spill the sand out as a crevasse play, and that's why they always occur on the outside bends of these meander loops. Here's another one just to show you another picture here. Splays occur on the outside bends of the meandering channel. And here's a river channel down here in this picture. And the crevasse splay, kind of like a fan-shaped body that was deposited out on the floodplain when you had the river breaking through the channel margin. So, if you can recognize this, you can make a very good reservoir. Okay, well, I want you to just take a couple of minutes and look at this seismic section and see if you can pick out any meandering river deposits on that seismic section. So just take a look at it for a couple of minutes, and there's actually several of them, several point bar deposits of a meandering river system. And what you can see is the lateral accretion packages, and you can also see the channels, the configuration of the channels. So take a look for a minute, then I'll show you a couple of them.
Is that the migration direction going to the left, actually?
Well, it depends. Some of them yes, and some of them no.
Yeah, because I see some of them going to the other side.
That's right. Why is that? It's just, see this picture right here? Okay, this one's migrating in this direction, and the one next door is migrating in the opposite direction. So that's what you see. Some of them migrating to the right, some of them migrating to the left. Here's a very nice one, for example, right here. What I've done is I've drawn the outline of the channel, and you can see some of these lateral accretion beds. Okay, so where would you want to drill your well? I would want to drill my well in the lateral accretion beds, not in the middle of the channel. How about down here though? Look at this, it's going the opposite direction. There's your channel right there, and your lateral accretions are going this way now. So that's an example of what you see up in this cartoon, where one will be migrating this way, and the adjacent one will be migrating in the opposite direction. So there's one. Here's another nice one, lateral accretion packages. The channel is here. Another nice one down here, lateral accretion packages and the associated channel. There's a whole bunch of them in here. Another one that's coming down something like that. There's a channel right here. So once you tune your eye, if you're a seismic interpreter, once you tune your eye to the particular feature that represents a particular type of deposit, it becomes relatively easy to see them. And once you see the downlapping, in this case, it's the downlapping pattern that's the easiest to see from the point bar, not the channel. The channel's kind of hard to see, but the lateral accretion packages are very easy to see. And we could sit here and find some more, but that's enough. I think you get the point. Here's another one here, lateral accretion there with the channel next to it, and so on. Notice one thing, that the lateral accretion are always downlapping in the direction towards the channel. So like, here's this channel here. Well, here's this channel here, or here's this lateral accretion, and the channel is right there. And again, this is just due to migration over time of the point bar and the channel itself, and the cut bank side of the channel. Yeah.
Can I detect these features on logs?
Well, on a conventional log, you'll get a sandy, usually kind of a blocky sand pattern, like a gamma ray log or something like that. If you've got a dip meter log, it's much easier because you can see the dips of the lateral accretion packages. So if you have a dip meter, a lot of people don't bother with dip meters. They use a dip meter just to work out the structure, and then they don't use the dip meter. But the dip meter is a very valuable log for stratigraphy too. And in this case, you would see on a well log, let's see, if we had a, well, this, for example, this feature right there, on a well log, well, on an outcrop, would look like that feature there. So if we put a well log down here, you're going to get a blocky sand below, and then a bunch of, well, I can't draw them that way, but a bunch of thin sand beds on top. So yeah, you can see the pattern if you know what to look for. And it's just a matter of mentally getting an image of what each sedimentary feature looks like on logs and on seismic and so on. But these features will be subtle. So you really have to have a mental image of what the geology, what you think it is, in order to make that sort of an interpretation from well logs, because they are subtle features. You can see here, these are gamma ray logs here, and you can see a pretty blocky sand, not much different from top to bottom. Okay, the way we look at seismic, if you're going to do, say, seismic stratigraphy, try to work out the stratigraphy from seismic, we prefer to look at horizon slices rather than vertical slices. Because if you can develop a horizontal slice, say in a 3D seismic survey, you actually, when you look down at that slice, you're actually looking at what the ground floor would have been at that time of deposition. So here, if we flatten out our reflectors, our amplitudes, onto a surface, in this case, what you see is a nice meandering channel, an old one, and it's buried in the rock record here with a nice meander loop there. Where would you want to drill your well? I think the best place to drill a well would be right in, get another color here. would be right in here. Because you have your most curvature, so you're going to have your largest sand body here. And you'll get a sand body here as well. And so maybe a secondary target might be something like this. So if you know these geological things about your reservoir, then when you see them on seismic, you can make the proper interpretation, and it helps you decide where to drill your well. Okay, what I'm going to show you now, and
Mr.
yeah.
How do you choose the best prospect when you have a lot of channels?
Well, that's actually what I'm going to show you next. But let's go back here. What I would do is I'd be doing horizon slices at different levels. Okay, different horizons. I'd be flattening, and I'd be then just looking for the feature. And like here, this feature, I'm going to be looking for the point bars, okay, or I'm going to look for the big meander bends, and the point bars will be on the inside bend. So that would be a prospect here. This one, a secondary prospect might be over there. Okay, yeah.
Only by size?
Huh?
Only by size of the sand body?
Well,
because when we talk about the fluvial environments, it's very important the seal also, because the fluvial environments are very randomic.
They're very what?
Random.
Random. The seal.
Well, they might not be as random as you think. Some studies have been done that shows regularity to the size and the shape, and it's not entirely random, but it doesn't really matter, because if you've got 3D seismic and you're looking at different horizons, it doesn't matter. You can see it. Okay, you can see the features, and you can measure. See, I can measure, if I know the thickness of this point bar, I can measure the volume, the pore volume, for example. I can measure that or make an estimate of it. And I can do that through successive horizon slices. But of course, that takes 3D seismic. I don't know if you guys work a lot with 3D seismic. Now, in the vertical, it's going to, unless you have something like this, where it's easy to see the point bars, it's going to be difficult in a situation kind of like this, where they aren't as pronounced, they aren't as thick, for example, so they don't resolve seismically in the vertical dimension. So you're better off doing horizon slicing with your 3D seismic. Well, let me show you an example of that now. And I've got to, let's see, I've got to set this up because it goes backward. So 1 second here. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is a stratigraphic interval of a certain thickness, and that thickness, the depth of the horizon we're going to look at, I'll be showing you. Well, the time thickness is going to be shown here alongside. So we're going to start deep, and like geologists do, they always start at the bottom and work their way up. like good geologists, because that's the way the sediments were deposited, and so that's the way we think about them. So I'm going to start at 140 milliseconds. Milliseconds is two-way travel time, and so I'm going to start at the bottom of this sequence. And what do I see when I look there? I see, looks like maybe getting a few little meander loops down here. Now I'm going to come up. Let's see, I think I need, excuse me. I think I do that. Damn, I made a mistake here. Okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'm going to start at I'm going to start at 184 milliseconds. Okay, that's going to be the deepest part of this sequence, okay? And what do I see here now? I can see a meander loop right there, coming across like that. I also see these, what I call the scroll bar, and that's the looking down at these lateral accretion surface packages. See how the curvature that you see inside that point bar, little curvature, that tells you got sand. Okay, so if I wanted to drill a well at that horizon, I'd probably want to drill it right in there, where I drill my well. Maybe a secondary target might be down there. All right, let's come up 4 milliseconds. And you see now we're coming up stratigraphically as well as in two-way travel time. And so you can still see nice meander belt coming across like that. And again, you see those nice scroll bars that represent the lateral accretion, that represent sand. So again, this looks like at least this sand body is at least 4 milliseconds thick, and here's its aerial extent. So you could calculate the volume of sand, or the pore volume if you want, if you knew something about the porosity. 176, I'm up another 4 milliseconds, and now I'm starting to lose it. Where we go stratigraphically higher, we can still see a little bit of remnant meandering river, but we're starting to lose that. So that whole interval, meandering river interval, is going to be about, we started at 186 milliseconds, and by 176 it's about gone. So maximum thickness is 10 milliseconds. And you could convert that to depth and then calculate the volume, or estimate the volume of the sand body. Okay, at 172, well, there's still a little bit of that point bar, but not very much. Here you can see some very nice scroll, those scroll marks. But by and large, your meandering system down here is pretty much gone by the time you get to 172 milliseconds. But what's happening now, if you look up here, you see another one starting in up here. Very nice meander loops, nice scroll bars. So some this becomes your target horizon. If you want to drill your well up in this area here, your target horizon is down to about 172 milliseconds. And at 168, it's becoming more pronounced. You can really see these nice meander loops. By 164, very well developed, and by now that whole meandering system is not present at that shallow a depth down in towards the south there. 160, it's really pronounced. Very nice scroll bars right here and right there. So that means you've got pretty good sand. Now the direction of migration, this point bar would be migrating up towards the upper right, and this one would be migrating towards the lower right, okay? And if this was a mud plug that filled up the abandoned channel, you'd actually have two different reservoirs. And actually there's a third one right here, nice point bar there, another one right in here, and so on. So a bunch of potential targets that you have. And what you would want to do, or at least what I would want to do, would be to try to position a horizontal well, say at 160 or 164 milliseconds, something like that, and go horizontal to try to cross those mud plugs and get more of those individual sand bodies. By 152 milliseconds, it's still there. So this is a pretty thick sandy interval up here. And when by the time we get into the 140, we're starting to lose that now. You can still make out the point bars, but not as pronounced. Or I should say you can still make out the meandering river, but it's not as pronounced. By the time we get to 144 milliseconds, it's almost gone, this system. So, but it's pretty thick, and now what's developing is a little offshoot, a little small meandering river coming down like this, and you see some very small meander loops forming now, way down there, but nothing very big or a good enough size. So at 100, by the time you get to 140, you have now started to develop another system. You've pretty much lost this system up here, and so what you've got is two stratigraphic intervals where you have the lower interval, the point bar system is towards the south, at the bottom of the picture, and the upper system is towards the north. So you've had some sort of migration from south to north of your river system over a geological time period. So to kind of summarize that, you have something like this. Here's the time slice at 140 milliseconds, and at 160, and I think this is 180 or something. But here's the interpretation, say, of this slice at 160, where you've got these point bars, lateral accretion going from north to south in this one, south to north on that one, and here's an abandoned channel going to form an oxbow lake. And so your drilling targets are going to be right here, right there, right there. What you would hope is that these mud plugs aren't from top to bottom of your sand so that you do get some connectivity across that mud plug. And I should have pointed that out, that not always are those mud plugs barriers. Sometimes they don't extend the full thickness of the reservoir. And so as long as you've got some connectivity, usually down near the bottom, you don't have to worry so much about the mud plugs. So here's a Ucayal River in Peru. Very nice example, an air photograph here, showing the active river. Here's just beautiful point bars with your now you can actually see the curvature going that way, and the curvature down here going the opposite way, curvature here. And so a good drilling target would be any one of these. There's 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That didn't show. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Dr. Slatt, I have a question about, you're talking about the meandering river, because of the mud condition, it'll become like a seal between reservoirs, right? But what about seals on the top, you know? What conditions do we need? Obviously a certain amount of thickness in that specific mud plug, or how can we determine?
Well, it's hard to say, give one number as to how thick. But quite often at the top, see, I'll go back to this picture here. This is at the top of that sequence, and even though you've got a little bit of a meandering system forming here, down here mainly, it's not very big. And so this is mainly going to be mud or a top seal. It's a floodplain, so when your river became inactive, you had deposition of floodplain deposits on top of the meandering system. So that would be a top seal in this case. Not related at all to the mud plugs. Different processes and different geological time. Mud plugs will form first, and then you may have your top seal, your floodplain on top of that. Or if you have a marine transgression, you can get marine mud on top that forms a top seal as well. Okay, that answer? Okay. Oh, so here at the bottom here at 184 milliseconds, now this is the bottom, and we've got our point bar down here. At 140 milliseconds, we pretty much have a floodplain setting. This is at 160 milliseconds here, where we now have this point bar system, and then at 140 it's pretty much gone, and you have your floodplain on top. So you could pick, now there is a scale here. This is a large scale feature that we're looking at. This is scale 10 kilometers, but if it were smaller scale, you saw these features, you might be able to put in a sidetrack well, where at 160 milliseconds, you go through some of the point bar, and then you go down to 184 and go through that lower system. Okay?
In the previous slide where you showed the Peruvian there, the mud belts, mud plugs would be the abandoned channels?
Yes.
And the outer bed of the active channel? Or only the
Yeah,
abandoned channel?
it would be inactive channels. Someday, so this is the modern river, it's flowing now. At some point in time, probably you're going to get a cutoff right about in here. Some point in time, you're going to get a flood with a very high velocity coming around the bend so that the river breaches that channel and that water has to go somewhere, so it goes across and connects up with the channel here. And now this will become filled with mud. It'll become a mud flood. After the channel becomes abandoned, it becomes a lake then. And lake is very low energy, so you'll just get mud deposited in the lake. Whereas on the point bar, that's where you get your sand deposited.
So it's important to detect those abandoned channels in order to not make the mistake to drill where the point bar is against where the lake is.
That's right. You don't want to drill into the lake, into the mud flood. Yeah, yeah. You don't want to drill there. But again, if you've got seismic and well logs, you can see these things as well. I'll show you some examples for that. And it becomes a lot easier when you have seismic to be able to detect these features, and you can pinpoint just where you want to put your well. Why don't we take a break, about a 15-minute break, and we'll carry on from there, okay?